Welcome to the Desert Shield Sniper Podcast. This is where I share some of my thoughts and ideas about the hobby. Now, let's start with episode 1 about eye appeal. Okay, I want to talk about eye appeal because lately it's been a hot topic. There are a lot of seasoned collectors, influencers, and YouTubers talking about moving away from grading and focusing on eye appeal. Now, I'm not going to say I support that because, in theory, I do think grading is necessary. But however, I do also believe in the fact that the card must have high eye appeal. So, meaning that if your card simply has a high grade but has a low eye appeal, that's something that I don't look for in my collection. Okay, and I'll tell you several reasons why. And if you're like a seasoned collector, you probably know these reasons. And if you have some more ideas or some other reasons why you should favor eye appeal or not favor eye appeal, please let me know. So, when I was a kid collecting during the junk wax era, grading did not exist back then, and I remember everything was all about the card being mint or not. Okay, whether it was trading with my childhood friend Jason, or selling to the shop at the mall. It was all about whether or not the card was mint or not. Okay, we didn't have that very sophisticated scale where something was gem mint, excellent, or very good, or poor, or whatever. It was just whether or not the card was gem mint or not. And a few other points I remember was that I actually don't remember centering being talked about that heavily. I mean, it is now, right? Obviously, and I'm a big centering guy. But as a kid, I just remember it's mainly just corners. And if you have the ding corners, like all of a sudden, oh, you don't have a mint card. Um, Surface and registration once again. But then again, I was just a kid and I wasn't, a very, very serious collector like most kids were back then. After all, we did store our cards wrapped with a rubber band or in a tin box, right? We'll talk about, neglecting protection for these cards. Now, does eye appeal still matter today? Because we now have grading. So shouldn't eye appeal, well, at least for graded cards, matter less? Well, there's two ways to look at it. Okay, I think first of all, some people are very reluctant, especially people with a lot of PSA 10s. Okay, they're very reluctant to accept that even a PSA 10 is really just an opinion, and that card can be imperfect. After buying several junk wax era cards, and that especially in the Desert Shield set, I've come to realize that's true. Okay. I own a few Desert Shield cards in the PSA 10 grade where even without zooming in to the card with a magnifying glass or a digital microscope, which I do often, I can already see that the card's not perfect. Whether it's a dinged corner, rough edges, or the centering looks more off than 45-55. Okay. So, but somehow it got the gem in 10 grade. I'm going to explore some other cards as well. For example, the 79 Gretzky, okay, O-Pee-Chee Wayne Gretzky, and which suffers from rough edges, especially on the left side, I believe, of the card. And I'm not even sure whether or not this has changed, but earlier on, a lot of graders were very lenient towards the left rough edge. And that's why you see a lot of these rough edges getting graded at PSA 8 or 9. Okay. I believe I saw one at one time that had a really rough edge at PSA 9. Now, this is because they know the backstory behind the card and how these cards were poorly made, and rumors have it that O-Pee-Chee made them in some basement of a factory, and with really limited resources, and that's why a lot of these cards, fresh out of manufacturing, was all banged up. Well, not banged up, but was pretty roughed up in terms of the cutting. Now, maybe that could apply to the Desert Shield set as well, because as we know with the backstory, and if you don't know, please watch my video about the backstory behind the 1991 Topps Desert Shield set. These cards were rushed out as well, and basically Topps had agreed to, well, actually suggested to gift these cards to the troops that was stationed in Saudi Arabia at that time. And the Pentagon had given them permission to do so. And I think in a matter of 2-3 months, Topps had to get these cards ready and ship them out to the Middle East. Now, and that's why we see that with these cards. Well, first of all, there's uncorrected errors because there wasn't really any time to fix these things. And secondly, compared to the base 91 Topps set, there are a lot more issues such as off-centering, um, and very, very rough edges. I don't really know how the rough edges came about simply because the cards were rushed. I mean, do cards get rough edges because the production was rushed? Rough edges from the cutting blades would seem to be more of the quality of the production or the tools rather than the production being rushed. But maybe, and because I'm no expert on card production, maybe because these blades need to be somehow treated in between um, cuts, let's just say, and because they were so rushed, they neglected to do so, and that's why we see a lot of really rough chipped edges with the Desert Shield set. Maybe. Now, so and that's why we see with certain cards a lot of these really, really evident chipped edges have been neglected in the grade, or ignored, I should say. Now, that's also um, aligned with the fact that early PSA grades were quite easy. Okay, and I think in the beginning, a lot of these cards were graded because I remember seeing an article when I was doing the video for the backstory of the Death Shield set, where earlier on, a lot of fakes had surfaced. And so I believe many of the collectors that owned these cards and knew they were authentic truly graded these cards, not really just for the grade, but just to ensure the fact that they're authentic and to show potential buyers and traders that they have the authentic Desert Shield cards. Now back to eye appeal. Well, does it only affect the graded cards then? Well, no. I mean, when you buy a raw card, wouldn't eye appeal matter more? It does for me. Okay, when I'm buying raw Desert Shield cards, I'm definitely looking at something that I think at least looks like, it may not necessarily grade gem mint, but I want to own a raw card that feels like it could grade a near mint or gem mint grade. So that's why you see that often when, and this doesn't only apply to the Desert Shield set, but because I buy a lot of Desert Shield singles from Desert Shield lots, etc., you'll see that cards of high eye appeal don't last long on eBay. And on the contrary, let's take an example that I've noticed. there's a card that I've been looking for quite some time, which was the Ozzie Smith PSA 9. There's a shield. Now, I recently bought one, by the way, and it's pretty well centered. Um, I can't say about the corners yet. Like there may be one or two soft corners, which, and I mean I do mean soft, not dinged, and which something that I could accept as long as every other characteristics of the card meet up to my expectations. And so far, from the picture on eBay, it does look pretty good. And a while back, a PSA 10 popped up, and back then it was selling for 800. And at that time, it just felt a bit expensive. And I know, based on today's prices, 800 is a steal. But we're talking about 2, 3 years ago, and back then the shield cards weren't that crazy. So since then, I've been, looking for a PSA 9 for quite some time. I did lose out on one auction maybe a year ago, and since then, nothing of high eye appeal popped up. And you can go and check on eBay now, and you'll see that there's actually 2 or 3 PSA 9s. But it's nothing I want to add onto my collection because mainly of the fact that the centering is quite off. Okay, and one pretty severe too. But the other two, um, as I remember, definitely does not meet the 45-55, or maybe even not 60-40. So sure, it has a PSA 9 grade, but the reason why I don't want to buy it is because as a buyer or collector, I I look for well-centered cards. And so I understand that come today I'm trying to sell these cards, people will have the same judgment on the cards that I have on the cards today. And it will be harder for me to resell these cards because as long as the cards aren't one of ones or super rare, there will be other options. And I think that we're now at a stage where people would probably rather buy a raw card that looks, near mint to gem mint than a PSA 8 or 9 that has like PSA 6 or 7 qualities. Now, PSA 10 is a different story because while we say buy the card, not the slab, there are many people that buy the slab and not the card. And actually, sometimes I do that too. Okay. And recently I've done that. I bought a PSA 9 Sparky Anderson, actually from the same seller that sold me the Ozzie Smith. And if he's following or if he's listening to my podcasts, I'm talking about him. So the reason why I bought the Sparky is the Sparky at a PSA 9, okay, is also another card that I've been looking for quite some time. The PSA 10 is awfully expensive. It does pop up, but rarely, and also on eBay at least. And also, it's one of those cards where you really have to. It's hard to decide whether or not you want to spend so much money on. Okay, I think with this set, there's a lot of these. Well, obviously, Sparky Anderson's not a common. I wouldn't consider him a common. Okay, great manager, well known. And but the thing is, are Sparky Anderson cards highly desired in the hobby? I wouldn't really say so. I mean, I'm sure there are Sparky fans, but the cards in general aren't highly desired. Okay, let's in comparison, let's say Jose Canseco. Okay, who is this fallen superstar, and in theory, a lot of his junk wax base cards don't have that much value. Okay, sure, the rookies, the autographs, or maybe some of the modern parallels and patches, whatever, may have some value. But especially during the hype of the junk wax era, which weren't his, well, would we consider this his rookie in the hype? Yeah, probably, right? 86, right? So, um, A lot of his non-rookies, though, they're not worth that much. However, they're not hard to sell as well because of the fact that at one time this guy was super massive, and everyone wanted Jose Canseco card. I remember, the story I have with my aunt that we still laugh about today is, as an immigrant, in the early years, my English wasn't that good. And I was looking for this Jose Canseco card. Okay. My neighbor, Sasha, had pulled one out of the pack and I was super envious. Not jealous, but super envious. And all we spoke about was Jose Canseco. He was like the superhero, right? Every time he was at bat, there's a very high chance he hit a home run. And obviously, he had talent. He could run and steal as well for someone of that size. Well, actually, at that time he wasn't super big. It's probably he was always on steroids, but it was not at the hype of the steroids era. But anyways, so I remember, I think it was my grandmother who bought me a box of Donruss baseball cards, and I've been trying to pull these Jose Canseco cards, and you know, halfway through the box, not one, and I was super frustrated. And my aunt came over, who was visiting me at the time, and said, "Well, why are you so frustrated?" I said, "Well, I've been trying to pull this Jose Canseco guy, and I've not been able to pull not even one. But I keep getting this Joe's Canseco guy." So, an innocent mistake by a kid, especially an immigrant, right? Um, whose language skills wasn't that good at that time. But, anyways, this is a story that I'll never forget. Quite honestly, even though I was quite frustrated at that time, I think I had a really good time chasing for that card. And by the way, once my aunt corrected me and say, "Yeah, the Joe's Canseco is the Jose Canseco," um, I realized that I had like at least 6 or 7 pulled from that box already. But of course, those cards, because I thought weren't the Jose Canseco, I just tossed around quite a bit, and it was pretty roughed up. Well, not roughed up, but I'm pretty sure it suffered from a couple dinged corners, and edges were pretty scratched up from rubbing against my floor carpet, etc. So yeah, um, back to the Sparky. The reason why I've been very skeptical about buying the 10 is exactly that, because people don't pull cards out of a pack and look for Sparky Anderson, but you will with other players. So the desirability of a player or a manager or whatever, of a card in general, is very important. And the reason why the Sparky sells for so much is simply because of the scarcity due to the fact that it's very, very condition sensitive. And if I was a set collector, and I think most set collectors, even if if money isn't that big of a problem, your priorities may not be with the Sparky Anderson card. And sure, I mean, if you can get it in a very good deal, um, why not pick it up, right? Let's just say you find one for 500 when it's selling for 1,000. But the thing is, you won't say the same with the Chipper Jones or Nolan Ryan or especially the Griffey, right? Look how much the PSA 10 Griffey is selling for now. You definitely not won't get that card at a discount, except maybe if the card has very low eye appeal. Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is eye appeal for raw cards. Okay. As I mentioned, I buy a lot of singles and small lots from collectors, and I'm very very picky. I'm okay with a soft corner here and there. I'm okay with very, very minor registration issues. And by minor, I mean slightest offset in the graphics, maybe not in photo, because with the photos, if there's an offset, the picture's not that clear. I learned that very early with a 57 manual, the one where he's posing with Yogi Berra. I bought that in a BVG 5. Okay, not a bad grade in today's standards, but little did I know that a card can still get a mid grade of 5 and be as blurry as hell. This is one card I want to replace now, after several years later, because it's an eyesore every time I look at that card and the image is blurry. So at the end of the day, it's all about having cards that don't look like an eyesore, right? And so I've noticed that with raw cards, sometimes a very high eye appeal raw card may sell for a established high grade a card, of the same card. Now, I'll give you one example where earlier on I was looking for some Bo Jackson's PSA 9s. And these cards, they're not cheap. PSA 9 will probably run you close to $500 nowadays on eBay. And a PSA 8 can easily go for $200-300 easily. Now, I believe um, I came across a raw one that looked pretty good a couple months back. And up to the final minutes of bidding, the card was still less than $100. I don't remember exactly how much, but it was probably the last maybe 30 seconds where it all of a sudden it jumped up to, at the end I ended up paying, I think it was like $200. Now, I'm not saying that's expensive for the card or an overly high price for the card, or I overpaid in general, because the card does look really, really good. Now, I'm not a grader, but it does have PSA 9 qualities, and maybe even 10. Who knows, right? Just whether or not I slipped that extra $10 into my submission. I'm just kidding, by the way. Don't do that. However, there was also another time where I bidded on a Ricky Henderson base card, and the it looked so good. The centering was just dead on perfect, spectacular corners. But and I won the bid for something like $245. Okay. And this is not even counting the international shipping, which I always talk about, which is super crazy. Probably something like $30 for shipping. And once it arrived, I took the card out of the, I don't remember, it was a top loader, or actually it may have been in MagSafe. But anyways, there was this tiniest imprint on the card. And you automatically know, if you've submitted a card with a imprint to PSA, you know that card's not going to grade higher than a PSA 6. Okay, even if it has like perfect corners, etc. Like they take off so much with imprints. You can have a dinged corner, you can have chipped edges, and it'll still be a 9, and in some cases, still a 10. And sometimes I've seen where a card has a stain and still gets a 10 or 9. But with the tiniest imprint, and this is also a known issue with the set, where some of these imprints actually existed when the cards were just got fresh off the line, but they take off a lot. Okay, so it's obvious that PSA, it looks heavily upon surface issues. But apart from me, there were a few other bidders, and that tells you that people are looking for a very high eye appeal. Okay, the reason why I want to talk about eye appeal and why I think eye appeal still matters is, look at what's happening with grading today. Okay, we're at a point where we still feel, I think obviously it's not just me, collectors do feel grading is significant. Okay, otherwise PSA would not get this vast number of submissions. But we also don't trust the grading because we know that the grading's inconsistent. We do know that there are fake cards being slabbed, and we do know that there are mistakes like the teapot situation with his Grant Hill submission. And why do we still grade then if we can't trust the authentication and the grades? Well, simply because the label and the slab gives us value. And it's because of the fact that they are now the market leader. And honestly, while they're not a monopoly technically, but I'm pretty sure we're pretty close to that stage. So having that PSA authentication or grade is really all we've got to establish the card to have a confirmed status of value and condition. It's ironic, isn't it? Because on the other hand, we don't trust those grades, and we don't trust, and there's questions about certain things about the authenticity. So this is where I think I agree with some influencers, where I appeals back. It's definitely weighing a lot more heavier on the hobby and with collectors today, and to a point where, while I would love a whole set of PSA 10 Desert Shield cards, I'm starting to favor PSA 9s over PSA 10s, as I mentioned several times in my videos, to a point where even if the 10s were available, if a 10 was available, um, and it looked pretty good, and a 9 that looked, you know, just as good was available, I may consider a 9. And the only time I would consider a 10 is if I know that 10s sell very, 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 very well and has very, very high demand. Let's just say the Griffey. Okay. Not that I'm in the market for a Griffey because it's just super expensive. But with the rest of the non-stars and Hall of Famers, I think I'm starting to favor the nines because I want to leave more budget for other cards. And also, I want to make a purchase and feel good about that purchase and not buy a card knowing that it's 10, but feel sour about it because you see that corner being very soft or even has the slightest paper loss. Um, so that is why eye appeal still matters. Now, the question I want to ask you today is, now, if you've been collecting for quite some time, you know, while we're not graders, but I think you'll have enough experience to kind of at least assess that whether or not that card has a high eye appeal or high grade potential. Do you think PSA is less relevant, or does it further um, establish PSA's position? Because ironically, they're now less accurate in grading, they're less consistent in grading, and they're a lot less trustworthy in the authentication. Okay, not from me, just from recent um, incidents and also from some feedback I've read online. But yet, they have a bigger market share, they have more submissions, and they're making more money. Does that further establish their position in the industry? And also, I want to ask everyone if you think eye appeal actually matters more today than it did before grading existed. Because I do think that it's actually more important today than before grading existed because of the fact that we can't trust grades anymore. So let me know how, first of all, how ultra modern PSA grading has affected the way you collected, or the way you collect, and whether eye appeal matters to you, and what you favor most when it comes to eye appeal. Thanks for listening. Talk to you guys soon.